Live.
Good afternoon and good evening for those who are joining us both here in Los Angeles from Sinai Temple, also locally in Southern California. And I also know we have participants from around the country as well. We want to welcome you to our program at Sinai Temple here with my esteemed and honored guest, Virginia Buckingham, author of the memoir On My Watch, which I will show you here. And if you have not had an opportunity to read it, I highly suggest it. And after this program, you're definitely going to want to grab a copy. I just want to shortly introduce Virginia, and then she'll address us this afternoon, and then we'll have a chance to interact a bit later. Many of us, of course, have those moments of we remember when. And in my generation, I graduated college in the year 2004. So I was a sophomore at Columbia University. And that remember when moment was September 11, 2001, walking into a biology class and seeing and hearing murmurings, what was going on in the world, hearing there was a traffic accident downtown in Manhattan, and then quickly realizing, as we heard through the classroom, that the first tower of the World Trade Center had fallen. That moment, that day, changed my life. I was pre-med, sitting in a biology class, and I ended up majoring in music, as many of you know, and using music through a rabbinic career. That moment, those moments, the moments that we live in right now, they allow us to reprioritize what we're thinking in our life then, and also where we want that our life direction to go as well. So this summer, each year, whatever community I have served, whether it's in Greenwich, Connecticut, the Valley at West Hills, Sherman Torah Synagogue, or here at Sinai Temple, each year I try to memorialize and remember that day in a very special way. I remember the 10th anniversary of 9/11 as I just become a rabbi. We did a very special Sunday morning service at Sherman Torah. And each year I try on this weekend to specifically speak about not a religious perspective, but how that day has shaped our faith, both personally in a communal sense and in a nation. This past summer, I came upon this book On My Watch. Again, I'll show it one more time. And it was a memoir of Virginia Buckingham, who, as you know, was the head of Logan Airport in Boston on that day of September 11th, 2001. I was so enthralled by the book and felt a connection to the words on the page that I looked Virginia up on Facebook, and I said, let me give it a shot and see if she'll respond. And not only did she respond, but when asked if she would address our community on the week of 9/11, she said yes. And for that, I am truly grateful for your time and for sharing your story with us today. So without further ado, if we were in person, I would give a round of applause, but I'm going to pass the Zoom screen to our new friend of Sinai Temple, Virginia Buckingham. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. It's a real delight for me to be here. It's a real honor. Just wanted to forewarn, I am working from home like so many of you. So there's an 18-year-old around somewhere. My husband will be home soon. I've told them all to be quiet. I've locked my cute little dog in my bedroom, but there might be some family type noises, and I know you'll all understand. This is an important week, and it's hard to believe, I think, for all of us that it was 19 years ago that this terrible, terrible attack happened. And I know this week we hold those families who, for them, I know it feels like yesterday. For us, sometimes I think it feels like yesterday. I know we hold them in our heart this week. Rabbi Sherman noted where he was on that day, and I'll tell you about where I was and what it was like at Logan Airport when we first learned of the attacks and what we were focused on. And my book does describe those early days and how we tried to rebuild confidence in commercial aviation. But more so, On My Watch is my story about how to rebuild a broken life. Like all of us, though, my story didn't start on 9/11. My story started way before that in my family and in my faith. And just so you know a little bit about me, I grew up in rural Connecticut here on the East Coast, and was the seventh of 8 children. And my family was a blue collar family. My dad worked as a milkman and a delivery man. My mom worked as a hospital clerk. They worked very hard. We were Catholic, you know, every Sunday in church, Catholics. And, you know, following my dad's example, I worked very hard and applied on a whim to a big out-of-state college because I thought I could, and ended up getting into Boston College, and moved to Boston when I was 17. And was not from a political family, but I needed to work to put myself through college. So I got an internship in my junior year, working in the State House, which paid money. So that was my first exposure to politics, and I was bit by the bug right away. Absolutely loved the excitement and the impact that you could have in government. And that ended up being the career path that I followed. I went to work for two long shot candidates for governor and lieutenant governor in Massachusetts. And for those of you who are familiar with Massachusetts, these two were New England Republicans, not expected to win, but they did. First Republicans in 20 years. I followed them into the State House, followed my father's example, kept my head down, got to the office at 5 a.m., worked as hard as I could. And began to sense I had some political strategic instincts, which, you know, who knew, because that wasn't my background, and rose very quickly through the ranks to become the governor's press secretary at the age of 25. By the age of 27, I was running Governor Weld's long shot US Senate campaign. I was his campaign manager. By the age of 30, I was Governor Weld's chief of staff. And in that role, I sat at his left at the table in his office and made the decisions of governing the great state of Massachusetts. I then had the honor to stay on for his successor, Governor Paul Cellucci, who asked me to stay on as chief of staff. And it was in that role that Governor Cellucci asked me if I would go over to the Massachusetts Port Authority, which was fighting very hard to build a new runway. And for those who have been stuck in air traffic delays throughout your travel, you know that that's a big problem in the US. And in Logan, we were one of the most delayed airports, and we're trying to build a new runway. And that fight had been going on for 30 years. With vociferous opposition from the surrounding neighborhoods. So Governor Cellucci asked me if I would go lead the Port Authority and fight for that runway and fight for other things that were pressing at that time. Passengers' Bill of Rights was pending in Congress, traffic and noise, and all the kind of problems that all airport operators were focused on. So every morning as I was driving to the airport, I had a tradition that I had started long ago in college, which was to say a prayer. And the prayer I would say was, "Dear God, help me to remember that nothing is going to happen to me today that you and I together can't handle." Along the way, I met a boy, and he was not from my tradition. We had very different backgrounds. He didn't believe what I believed. His dad had escaped the Holocaust. He was the oldest son in a Jewish family who cherished his culture and traditions. We became best friends and we fell in love. He told me I was his beshert, his destiny. And when we got married by a judge under a huppah, in a ceremony I wrote myself, blending our traditions, David broke a glass wrapped in a family treasured cloth. And the judge spoke about the meaning of that tradition, something that I had researched in writing the ceremony. The fragility of the glass, I wrote, is meant to remind us of the fragility of life. But I didn't really know about the fragility of life back then, not really. My love for my husband and soon our own precious son was complete and uncomplicated. My sleep was undisturbed by bad dreams, and my career and my life seemed limitless. So I know you have your own stories from 9/11, and you know where you were and who you called when you saw those horrific images, and some of you lost people you knew or loved. And those stories bring us together still. They're our shared history, except that feeling of unity is not my 9/11 story. I was driving to Logan to fly down to Washington actually that morning to work on the runway project, and was listening live to the radio and heard about the first plane that had hit the towers and thought it was an accident, like many of us thought at the first report. So it was very confusing. I was listening live when a reporter saw the second plane go into the second tower. Very shortly thereafter, I got a call from my office at Logan saying 6 words that changed the world and changed my life certainly forever. 2 planes are off the radar. 2 planes are off the radar. We didn't know for sure the planes that hit the towers were from Logan. We got conflicting reports for hours. But we focused on the job before us, which was to close down the airport, to clear all the terminals of passengers, to secure all the planes that remained on the ground, and to open a family assistance center so families who were fearful that their loved ones were involved could come to the airport and get care and get information. At some point that morning, my mom called to check on me. And that's the first section I want to read to you all from the book. It's from chapter 3, which is called The Day. Approximately 10:34 a.m. My assistant Julie said my mother was on the phone. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I'm okay," I answered. I wished I could have said in response, "The towers, Mom, the towers are gone. Thousands, maybe tens of thousands of people are dead. Oh my God, Mom, the planes came from Logan." But I couldn't, even then, change the dynamic of a family relationship in which I was always the good one, the successful one, the okay one. A devout Catholic, my mother in turn tried to comfort me with our shared faith. God always has a reason, she said. God would never stand by and let this happen, I snapped back, my voice rising. I paused a second to try to speak more calmly. I refused to believe in that kind of God. The all-powerful God she raised me to believe in opens a window when a door closes. He answers prayers, works miracles. How could he stand by and let hijackers murder thousands of innocent people? Barely concealing my rising fury at her, at God, maybe at both, I said shortly, "I can't talk about this now. I have to go. I'll call you later." Neither she nor I knew that a major foundation of my life, my belief in God, had shifted. A faith that had been as tangible and present as the ground I stood on, solid and unmoving, was gone. Destroyed in a matter of hours, as completely and as unimaginably as the Twin Towers. So very shortly after 9/11, the media frenzy around what had happened at Logan FY grew quite intense. Within 2 days, there was the first story in the newspaper suggesting I might be fired as a result. There were blaring headlines every single day, very angry talk show hosts and callers, to the point that I started to get a little scared for my own safety. Editorials and columns arguing that Logan Airport was chosen because I was a political appointee and that I had let security weaknesses go unaddressed. TV reporters knocking on my front door at night, asking if I was going to resign. I had a meeting late in September in the governor's office, a different governor than I had worked for. And she told me that she knew there was nothing Massport could have done. And she knew that the only reason she could sleep at night was because I understood how politics and the media work. 6 weeks later, she forced me to resign, shattering the career I had built in public service. Later, I was notified that a 9/11 family had sued me personally in federal court for wrongful death, asking a judge to hold me personally accountable for the murder of their husband and father of their 2 little sons on one of the planes. That moment shattered my heart and my soul. It took many years for me to understand why I was blamed and to see how scapegoating is so common in our culture. And it's such a flawed way of addressing so many problems that we have in the world around us. To recognize how blaming lets us avoid the reality and the truth of the fragility of our lives, how there's no such thing as perfect safety, how personal resilience can look far less perfect than the resolution our culture insists on, that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. How brokenness and beauty can reside together in one heart. So I'll close this part of the program, and I know we're going to explore many of those issues in the conversation with the rabbi and then in your questions. I'll read one more part of On My Watch, and then I look forward to talking with all of you. This is from chapter 18 in November of 2003, and its title is Maybe God Cried Too. I was here in a synagogue. I'd hardly set foot in any house of worship since 9/11, never mind a temple. And I'd never been to a bar mitzvah. Yet unexpectedly, the surroundings felt comfortable, familiar. The cantor began to sing. I closed my eyes and let the music wash over me, wondering if it would mean anything, not only because the language was foreign, but because music, just like prayer, had ceased being a way to God for me. My mom had been the soloist in our parish church, her rich soprano, a central part of the congregation's worship. While it had embarrassed my teenage sensibilities to see her standing behind the lectern each Sunday morning, it also taught me to pray through music. Turn to me. Here I am, Lord. Be not afraid. Sometimes through those favorite hymns, I felt God was speaking directly to me, telling me he would be there if I needed him. As the unfamiliar music and Hebrew chanting filled the sanctuary, I thought back to a recent session with my therapist, Andrea. She had uncharacteristically asked me about my relationship with God. I wouldn't typically talk about religion, she said, but I have a gut feeling that the way you'll get back to yourself is through God. I was surprised by the comment, although I had once described to her that many times I would sit in the chapel at Boston College as a young student and think I felt God's presence. Go home tonight and write God a letter, she urged. Just see what might come of it. Our friend's son Jordan took his place next to the rabbi as the Torah was placed in front of him. On that ride home from the appointment with Andrea, I thought about her suggestion. There was a chill in the damp air. A light rain had begun falling. I realized I was shaking, not with cold, but with anger. The feeling made me uneasy. Who was I to be angry at God? David squeezed my hand and said he was getting up to help his father Marvin, who suffered from Parkinson's disease, join the rabbi and do an honorary prayer called an Aliyah. I nodded, still lost in thought. Where was God on 9/11? I asked myself, maneuvering through the traffic as I neared home. Did he just stand by and watch as the hijackers boarded the planes? David sat back down next to me and drew my attention back to the front of the temple. Jordan looks great, he whispered, as our friend's son began to read his Torah portion. From the altar? I knew that wasn't right, but I didn't know what to call it. When Jordan finished, the rabbi stepped down from the bima. That's what David said the raised platform was called in a whispered answer to my question, and began telling the congregation the story of God destroying Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham challenged God, he said. He urged God to stop. The rabbi moved towards the group of Jordan's Hebrew school classmates. What do you think Abraham was doing? He asked them. A student ventured an answer. Then the rabbi provided his. Perhaps, he said, Abraham was trying to teach God. Perhaps we not only learn from God, but also God learns from us. The rabbi suggested God is evolving. Abraham is trying to teach God that if he is looking for perfection, for justice, he will never find it in flawed human beings. He will never find it on earth. I looked up at the pitched roof over the wooden crossbeams, providing an illusion of support, and then glanced at the stained glass window behind the bimah, so reminiscent of a church. David could sense my disquiet, and he leaned over. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I might be," I answered, and finished the thought silently. "I might be, if this turns out to be true. On 9/11, maybe God cried too." Thank you for listening, and I look forward to our conversation.
Wow. I think that line is a lot about what we're actually feeling in today's world, that so many of us are searching for God. Like Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, he titled his book not Man Searching for God, but actually God in Search of Man. And the same is true. Are you familiar with Rabbi Harold Kushner in the Boston area? In Natick, Massachusetts. Actually, my college roommate's on this call, and his father was the successor to Rabbi Harold Kushner, but he writes the book, not why bad things happen to good people, but in fact, when.
I am familiar with that.
Yeah. So based on that and the whole real conversation about God, and in fact, as a first-year rabbinical student at the Jewish Theological Seminary, Professor Neil Gilman of blessed memory, he would ask that God before 9/11, he would ask, where was God in the Holocaust? Where was God in the cancer ward? And that extra question was added to us, where was God on 9/11? Based on what you just spoke about in terms of perhaps God was crying too, and based on Rabbi Kushner's book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People, are there moments when you perhaps those days and months after 9/11 saw the goodness of God as well?
Thanks for the question. Yes, and I saw it in the goodness of other people, because the compassion and kindness that was shown to me and has been shown to me over these many years, including from some 9/11 families, were astounding and graceful, and that they allowed me to be part of their grieving and to get to know their family members and allowed me to share my own grief was an incredible gift. And that's where I have seen God.
And then maybe you can speak a little bit about your family. I know you have two children, who one was not born yet on 9/11 and one was basically an infant. There's a beautiful passage in the book that he basically asks you, like, Mom, why did you leave your job at the airport? And you explain that so, all I can say is gently and beautifully, but I think there's deep meaning in there. Maybe you can share with that, and also how then you were able to build your own personal family while still going through, the grief, the trauma as well. Were those parallel paths? Were they divergent? How did they either intersect or not?
Thank you. So I'll start with the latter part of your question, because I know not everyone who goes through trauma has the gift of having children. But luckily I did. So I was 5 weeks pregnant on 9/11 with my daughter, who's now 18, and my son was 2. And without them, I'm not sure how the story would have turned out. But I was determined to be a great mom to them. And I was determined not to let what had happened with me impact their lives. And that determination drove me, and still does to some extent, because, as all of you who are parents know, it doesn't matter how old your kids are, they're always your babies. And, their innocent love of me in those early days when things were really painful and traumatic were just so hopeful. I talk about in the book about the ocean, and at times talked about drowning myself in the ocean, and also going there for peace. And my little son, who was 4, one time when we were driving around, said, from the back seat, Mom, I have to tell you something. And I said, what is it, Jack? And he said, Mom, I love you deeper than any ocean. I love you more than there are shells and sand on the beach. And I was like, okay, that's sweet. And he said, Mom, everything I'm telling you is true. And, I told that story at his bar mitzvah about how he lifted me up as a little boy. And similarly, my daughter, as she grew, I would hear a song that would bring me back to those days. In this case, Lee Greenwood's God Bless America, I think is the title, or I'm Proud to Be an American. And it would always make me sob because I heard it in those days right after 9/11. And my daughter heard it with me somewhere, and she's like, "Mommy, let's dance. Clap, Mommy, clap." And it helped me take that memory and move it over, that sad memory, and have that joyful memory with my daughter. So I was very blessed, and still am, to be their mom. And, my son, was too little to know, but as time went on, and I think he was 6 when he, said, "Mom, why did you leave your job?" And I said, "Well, some bad guys took some planes." And he goes, what do you mean?" And I said, "Well, some bad guys wanted to hurt people. And you know how you and I, we love people and we love everyone in our lives. They didn't love people. And so they wanted to hurt them." And in the wisdom of a 6-year-old, he actually said, "I still don't understand why people were mad at the airport." And I didn't really have a good answer for that.
So based on that, in terms of, people loving people and bad guys, doing things to good guys in the more the elementary sense, but I also think when we really speak about this idea of blame and forgiveness, I mean, those are also themes that will come up shortly in our Holy Days next week as well. And you're right, I'm just going to read the quote that you wrote. You said, "Sometimes when people are scared, they get mad. Instead of thinking about what makes them scared, they blame someone for making them feel that way." That's actually the Yom Kippur Torah reading that we read from the book of Leviticus, where we basically put the blame on a goat and you basically push the goat off the mountain. In terms of the blame aspect, at what moment did you sort of comprehend that you were going to be a scapegoat? And what was that journey like? Who do you talk to in those moments? Was it only your family? What do you do?
So it took a while for me to understand it wasn't going to just blow over in terms of the blame, because it was hard for me to process that an attack on our country and that was going to start a war could be pinned on one person. That just made no sense. And also, 2 planes were hijacked at the very same time from 2 other airports. So it was rather obvious that the security issues, to the extent there were any, was a national issue. However, that's not what happened. So, I focused on doing my job and didn't engage in the political speculation, and was asked constantly by reporters who were trailing me around everywhere about it, but I really tried to avoid it. I also tried to do the right thing from a leadership perspective and say, if there's an investigation that finds there's something unique to Logan Airport, then I accept responsibility for that. I don't think that's true, but if that is true, I accept responsibility for that. And there was really nothing I could say that would kind of assuage the noise of the crowd. And people were fearful. And I've come to understand, as you said, that when you're afraid and things are out of your control, by blaming, you kind of bring yourself back in control. Okay, if she wasn't in charge of Logan Airport, if she wasn't a political appointee, if she wasn't there, then they wouldn't have targeted Logan Airport. A real flawed way of thinking, but it was in the moment the way people assuaged fear. It's the way leaders were able to kind of put a Band-Aid over the situation by forcing me to resign. So now Logan Airport's safer because I wasn't there anymore.
Mm-hmm. And then maybe just for those who have not read the book yet, I don't want to say the character, but the person you spoke about, is it Tui, or I'm not sure how to pronounce that?
Michael Tui, yep.
Yeah, he said something fascinating. Maybe you can explain who he is, but you said, "There's never a day without thinking about that day. It's just there. It's in your blood, your system, your feelings. It's like the sky. It's always there. It's like your name. How do you try and not know your name?" If you can just maybe share who he is and what you learned from him.
Sure. So I give him such enormous gratitude for explaining to my parents how I felt, because no matter what I said, they couldn't understand why I felt so devastated, shattered, and guilty about what had happened. My parents were faithful readers of Yankee Magazine, as those of you from the Northeast might be or were as well. And there was a story in Yankee Magazine probably a couple years after 9/11. And the headline was, "Why is this Maine man haunted by 9/11?" And my mom called me up and she said, "You have to read this story." And he was a gate agent in Portland, Maine. And two of the hijackers, including Muhammad Atta, kind of the ringleader, had boarded the plane in Portland and flown into Boston to connect to a plane to Los Angeles. Whether they thought that was evading security, I don't know. And in the story he told Yankee Magazine, he talked about how he just didn't like the look of Muhammad Atta, how he actually made his blood run cold, and that under the protocol at the time, he was able to issue a boarding pass that would have allowed them to avoid security at Logan, but something about it, he just didn't want to. And so he didn't. And Atta got very angry and they had a confrontation, and Tui described how it was like looking at the devil himself. But he had no way to stop them. Why would he stop them? Here are two businessmen, seemingly, and he said, "Mr. Atta, if you don't hurry, you're going to miss your plane." And that phrase, that word, has haunted that poor man. And when I read that, I just knew I had to talk to him, because here was someone who understood how I felt. And I wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault. And I wanted to try to ease his burden if I could. So I looked for him. I finally found him. He was listed in the telephone book, and I called him up and I left him a message. And I said, "You might not know who I am, but here's who I am. And I just want you to know you're not to blame for this. And thank you for telling your story. And you helped me explain to my parents finally how I feel too." So he called me back shortly thereafter, and we talked for at least an hour. And it was miraculous, because it was like meeting someone's heart to heart. He understood how I felt. I understood how he felt. And I don't know that we eased each other's pain, but just to be recognized in it was enormously healing for me. And I write about it in the book, and the chapter is called "We Share a Pain," because as we hung up, we said, "I don't know if we're ever going to talk again." And he said, "I know, Virginia, but we share a pain." And we do. And I'm grateful to him.
Are you still in contact with him, or?
I haven't been since that conversation. I see him on TV occasionally around the anniversary, advocating for security and things like that. But I don't know how he's doing. I hope well.
Wow. So I'm going to ask one more question. And then if you do have questions, you can either privately send me a chat and I will ask, or I will read the chat. So that's how we'll do it. I'll be sort of the moderator. So you can write the questions to me, and then we will go from there. This last question is more of a high holiday question. Again, that's sort of on our mind. And this whole idea of teshuvah, which means to repent, but really it doesn't mean to repent. It really means to return. It's actually about returning to oneself. And you write, I don't know exactly where in the book, but you say, "Changing our lives will be the greatest gift that we can give to the departed. They surely expect more from us than to merely memorialize their names." So I'm going to ask you, how have either you changed your life or your life changed based on that teaching? And also, as we approach the 19th anniversary of 9/11, what do we do now to change our lives in the time of a pandemic like this, when we're beginning to again see these ideas of blame sort of being thrown out around society on both sides of the aisle?
I obviously didn't plan to launch my book during a pandemic. It took 13 years to write. I tried to publish it for a few years and finally did. But in a strange way, it's the perfect time to publish it, because some of the lessons, some of the story does resonate so strongly with what's happening now. I talk in the book and I offer the book because this is how it transformed me. My understanding now of the role of blame in our culture, in our society, and how wrong it is and how hurtful, and how it leads to much bigger tragedies than anything that befalls one person. I think that that's a transformative idea for me. The other one that I offer, and I so hope it helps other people, is the idea of resilience not being what our society insists that it has to be. And for so many years, I felt like I was failing at being strong and failing at being resilient because I still felt very broken and very shattered by what had happened. Yet here I still was, still living my life, having moments of meaning, having moments of joy, having a family, having a new career. And I began to think maybe resilience isn't that. Maybe it's not that you're stronger by what happened and you just move on from what happened. Maybe you move forward instead. And by that, I mean, maybe you carry that broken part of you with you and you carry it right next to the joyful parts of your life. And maybe resilience is more like a bottle thrown into the ocean that is broken apart over years by the wind and the salt and the waves and tumbled into something completely unrecognizable than what it was, which is sea glass. And I'm fortunate to live on the coast and the East Coast, and I collect sea glass, and it's so beautiful and just brings such joy if you just hold it in your hand. And maybe that's resilience, being broken apart and unrecognizable as what you were before, but still of value and still capable of building a life of joy and beauty. And it's those things that I've learned that I'm trying to, offer with my story.
Wonderful. We have a question that said, in the early days after 9/11, when you were just trying to work through it all, did you have a certain mantra? I know you actually talked about the prayer that you would say every day going to work. A certain mantra, phrase, or thought process that you found helpful in order just to simply get through every day?
So no, first of all, I didn't pray again until very recently. So I stopped praying altogether. And I was fortunate enough, and this is going to sound strange, but I'm going to throw it out there. I had PTSD because of all of this. And part of PTSD is to dissociate from trauma, stress, emotion. And that actually saved me, I think, in those early days and even early years, because I just plowed ahead and I didn't think about what this all meant. I didn't try to understand it. I just I need a new job. I need to raise my kids. I need to keep going one step at a time. And I kept getting pushed back by things in the court case that were ongoing and felt, sometimes like I couldn't do it another day. But that dissociation served me. And, PTSD is called a disorder. My counselor says it's an order because it's your mind trying to help you give order to a situation that seemingly has none. So I would say that's what helped me, not a mantra, not a prayer, but just being able to, until I was strong enough to deal with all of the emotion, put a wall up and get through until I could reckon with it.
Also, you share your story obviously now through being an author and an amazing writer. Just if you can share, I was fascinated when you went through the journalistic aspect of your career after 9/11. Was it correct me if I'm wrong, the Herald or the Globe? I don't remember.
Erez, yeah.
The Herald. And you seem sort of a bit when you share your story, when do you not, when is it too much, when is it too little? When I asked you a couple of days ago, what can I ask you? You said I'm an open book. But when you're in different situations, when does that come? When does that come up? When do you want to share it? What does that look like both then and now?
Well, now it's such a relief because this is it. This is my story. This is who I am. Of course I do other things. But instead of kind of trying to say, I don't want to be Ginny Buckingham 9/11, which I did for many years, try to push that away and hated that association and talk about how it felt like, my cells were attacking my own organs. I so much did not want to be identified that way.
Uh-huh.
I accept it. I accept it's part of my life. It's part of my story. It's a thread in the tapestry of my life. It's not my entire life, but I accept it and I share it openly. And I think that kind of vulnerability and authenticity is a way to connect with other people. People share with me stories they may not share generally either. And it's a real beautiful thing.
Yeah. So this is a question that comes from a intense story of 9/11, somebody who was actually going to be on that flight from Logan to LA on 9/11, but for whatever reason actually skipped the business meeting on September 10th and flew home early, which you probably heard many different stories, like that over the time. This is more of a security question. If you're willing to address that aspect as well. I mean, in simple terms, it's how did terrorists get through the gates? I don't know if you're willing to address something like that.
Yes, sure.
And also, based on that, then the pilot aspect would, in terms of carrying arms now, what did that look like then? What did it look like now? And do you think that's perhaps the right decision?
Okay, so first I just want to stipulate, so I've been out of aviation for 19 years now, so I'm not an expert on what is happening now by any stretch. So I don't want to put out there that I am. So just so you know. Secondly, most importantly, I'm so glad you did not make that flight. Thank you for asking the question. And I'm really, really glad you're here. So the 9/11 Commission is widely seen as the most thorough review of what happened and how. And what they determined, first of all, was that Logan's security was the same as any other large airports at the part where it really mattered, which was those security gates, which at the time were run by contractors hired by the airlines, and that the hijackers simply carried small knives, less than 4 inches, onto the planes that didn't get detected. And there's some, I've read some notion that even if they had been detected under some airline rules at the time, they might have been given right back to them because they were so small. And, as you know, the cockpit doors were not locked at that time. Often they were either left open or they were unlocked. And, no one conceived at that time that the planes themselves would become the weapons. There was, the security protocol was looking for bombs at the time, and that's what the whole system was set up to achieve, was to deter a bombing or a bomb being brought onto a plane. Things have changed now for the better. Obviously we haven't had another 9/11, and I'm obviously proud of the part I played in that. We at Logan fought very hard to federalize security right away. We're the only airport operator to call for the federal government to come in and take it away from local government and the airlines. And we brought in actually an expert from Israel right away, who was the security director at Ben Gurion Airport. And Israel, as you probably well know, has the safest aviation system in the world, for a very good reason. And he instituted with us the first ever behavioral screening program, instead of just looking for weapons, to look for behaviors that would tip you off that someone might have an ill intent. And that ultimately was adopted as a pilot by the TSA. So I'm very proud that we were part of that. And I'm not afraid to fly. I don't know if that's a question of anyone's. I wasn't then, I'm not now. I think I'm aware of the fragility of life in a way I never was before, but I also feel very safe.
And ask for more questions. If not, I have one more to conclude. Again, I just want to thank you for your openness, and I hope that everybody does have a chance, especially, again, I keep mentioning the high holiday season, but again, On My Watch by Virginia Buckingham, her memoir, but really a story of, I like to focus on the forgiveness, and really the forgiveness of self, which I think is really important as well. You write about the image of the trampoline, and the idea of how we can make ourselves feel safe enough from the pain of being blamed and blaming yourself, to finally letting yourself bear it, to lift the fog of anxiety, self-loathing, fear, and anger. And then my favorite part, you write, and then possibly hoping for peace. So what is the message that perhaps you can give us on this, both almost eve of 9/11, but then also, and I remember, and I wrote this last week, but you couldn't get a flight out of New York. I was going to Syracuse, where I'm from, and going through the Lincoln Tunnel and looking back and seeing that plume of smoke, And then I stayed home until after Yom Kippur. And I remember getting a flight back on JetBlue, and for the first time going into Kennedy, seeing the vast emptiness there. And actually never wanting really to go to, I never went downtown really to Ground Zero until last year actually, with my parents, and we visited the memorial, which was unbelievable. How do we get to that moment of looking towards peace, not to peace, because we're always striving to that, but how do we finally get to the moment where we can actually strive towards peace, and obviously peace in the world, but I think it starts just within our own souls and our own hearts. And then one more question after that we have.
It does. Beautiful question. So the trampoline, I want to just mention where that came from. So there's a wonderful book called The Body Keeps the Score. And I can't remember the author off the top of my head at the moment, might come to me, but he writes about how your body takes on trauma and what it does to your body. And it's just a fascinating book. But he had a friend who lived right near the World Trade Center who was dropping his son off at kindergarten. And was there when the planes went into the towers. The little boy, who was only 5, saw everything, including the most terrible things. And sometime later, this author was at their apartment and saw the child had drawn a picture of the towers burning and falling. And at the very bottom, there was this like little round disc, little dark round disc. And he said to the little boy, "What is that?" At the bottom of the towers, and he said that's a trampoline, so that when the buildings fall the next time, that people will be able to save themselves. And just extraordinary, which got me thinking, what is my trampoline? What is going to bring me to peace? And what I've learned is my trampoline is holding on to what I know is true. Holding on deep in my heart to what I know is true. In my case, it's that I was not to blame. I didn't do anything wrong. I never was to blame. And holding on to that with all my strength and all my heart, and then moving forward and trying to do good in the world if I can. So I guess that's what I would offer as my path to peace.
So I have one question and one comment. One is actually from my wife, Rabbi Nicole Guzik, who just read your book this past week and said that you're an incredibly inspiring leader and mother. And thank you for your vulnerability and willingness to share your story. So thank you.
Thank you.
And also a question sort of going more towards the political slant in terms of, you mentioned your path towards Logan was through politics. Has your experience of being, if you wish, the sacrificial lamb change your opinion about government?
No, in fact, I keep encouraging my kids to pursue a career in public service. My husband's career is in public service. I think, I know there's a lot of important jobs like yours, Rabbi, but I think there's a lot to be said for how much impact you can have being in government and being a leader in government. For a young person, you can take on so much responsibility and learn so much at a young age that you really can't do in other fields. So I'm a huge booster and believer in public service.
Beautiful. I think that's our mission here, both at Sinai Temple. Our senior rabbi, Rabbi Wolpe, often says that what we do inside our building should be felt outside, and then also what we do outside should be brought in as well. And so when I read your book, I don't know what urged me to search you on Facebook and pray and hope that you would return my message, which you did quickly. But I felt this urge to bring what I read outside into our community, especially during this time leading up to 9/11, and also, of course, during our holiday season. I want to, again, personally thank you on behalf of our own Sinai Temple community and everybody who is watching here. Again, if you have not read this book, it is a must, especially during these times of our holidays and society on my watch. And I'm getting lots of comments that are just thanking you and appreciating you for your warmth and vulnerability. And we look forward to continuing our relationship with you and being together on many occasions as well. We wish you a peaceful week. We know that it's a difficult week for everybody, but also know that we are standing with you, and thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. We wish everybody a wonderful week and early Shabbat Shalom. And if we don't see you before next week, a Shana Tova, a Happy New Year for whatever screen you will be watching. We hope that that screen will inspire you to action when we once are able to gather in person again. Thank you so much.